Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be reading, summarizing, and analyzing Act 1, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's Hamlet. In the first part of the video we're going to go through some essential or important questions, some vocabulary, and some reading strategies that will help guide our reading so that we can focus and critically analyze this difficult text in a narrow and specific way, rather than just kind of like all over the place, helter-skelter, look at the different pieces and parts without any kind of guidance or focus. So we're going to try to do it in a very systematic and focused way, and we're going to try to base our analysis on the psychoanalytic framework that's been set up by the philosophers and thinkers that we've introduced already in the lecture series. And so if you're not familiar with the psychoanalytic framework or lens that we're going to be using to look through and analyze Hamlet, I would suggest maybe going back and looking at that introductory video that will give some guidance in terms of how we're going to be looking at the text kind of broadly using the psychoanalytic framework. But for today's lesson, what we're going to think about is how Shakespeare is setting up the text for us, the play for us in this first scene of this first act. This is Shakespeare's opportunity to really grab his audience textually and in terms of the framework of the play itself. He's got all these people who are watching this play from the very beginning. He's got to grab them and keep their attention throughout the remainder of the play, and so this is his opportunity. So we've got to be thinking about that as we're reading this play. How is he grabbing our attention and moving us forward from this point? In addition, we're going to try to think about a deeper, much more metaphysical question, which not with all the time and all the video space in the world could I really address sufficiently for you, but it's something that is perhaps one of the most important questions that we can think about in our lives, which is, who are you really? Who are you? If someone asks you this question, you might answer with your name, but to what extent is that really addressing the depth of this question? It's kind of like answering with a pronoun, right? I'm me, but what does that really mean? Who are you? Who is watching this video? Who's studying this play? Who might be watching this play? Who are you? And it's an important consideration for us to be thinking about as we're studying and thinking about these characters. Who are these characters? So, as we're moving through, important for us to keep in mind that Shakespeare, in this first act, in this first scene, he's setting up what we've come to call in literary circles the exposition. An exposition, as I say here, among other things, establishes the elements of the plot that are or will become the central conflicts of the story. Now, in every story, there is a central conflict or a central problem or a central issue that the characters have to come in contact with. It's the thing that guides the plot. And so in the exposition, we start laying out these pieces and these parts that are going to create or address this central conflict or this central problem. It's like if you can imagine a game board or like a chess board or any game that you want. We're laying out the pieces and we're basically establishing the rules about how these pieces are going to move so we know where they're going to go. We can start to make some predictions. So with that in mind, Shakespeare, being the master storyteller that he is, grabbing our attentions, moving us forward in the play, he's going to use a literary strategy in this first act, in this first scene, to hint at what is going to be coming further on in the story and in the play. And we call this foreshadowing. Specifically, what foreshadowing does is it hints and suggests what's going to come later in the story, so that we kind of work with these different pieces and these parts laid out in the exposition, and we try to fit them together like pieces of a puzzle to try to understand how they're going to be interacting and working together further on in the play. So as we're reading and we're analyzing the work here in just a moment. I want you to think about how these different elements might fit together and suggest what's going to come further along in the play. So that's at that top level, that textual level, of just what's going on in the text. How is the text going to work, and how is it going to lay out the story? On a deeper level, what we're going to try to think about psychoanalytically is, based on what's happening in the text, what does that tell us about who these characters are, what they value, and how they're going to interact with one another on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, on a psychological level. And then on yet another deeper level than that, what does this mean about who we are as watchers and viewers of this play? And what does it suggest that we might value based on how we're going to think about these people? So let's jump into the text and see what we can do with that analysis. Our text, which comes from Folger digital text, will be linked in the description beneath this video and all following videos. It begins with a list of the characters in the play, what we call the dramatis personae. Who is going to be acting in the play, and what roles are they going to be playing? For the focus of this video, we're not going to be going through all of the different characters which are going to appear throughout the play. Rather, we'll just talk about some of the characters which are going to appear in our first act and our first scene. Remember that as we're reading, our focus is how is Shakespeare setting us up for what's to come? How is he using foreshadowing in the exposition in order to be able to show us and to allude to the major ideas and the major events that are going to be coming in the play? So what we're going to be looking for while we're reading is aspects of setting, aspects of character, and aspects of plot that are going to link us to what is going to be coming as we move through the remainder of the acts and the scenes. So without further ado, let's get into Act 1, Scene 1 of William Shakespeare's Hamlet. For this first scene, we have 4 main characters and then hints at other characters that are going to be appearing. As far as our main characters, our characters that are going to appear on the stage, we've got Barnardo, Francisco, and Marcellus. These 3 characters are castle guards. They're not like nobility or high class characters. They're lower class or kind of commoner characters, which the people who are watching the play from the ground in Shakespeare's time, what they called the groundlings, or the people that got in for very cheap or free to watch the play, would identify as kind of being in the same kind of caste and class as them. Horatio is a young, educated noble and friend of Hamlet, and so he's of a higher class. Then there's the ghost who will appear, who is meant to represent, so we're told, the ghost of the late King Hamlet. Now, it's important to keep in mind there are 2 Hamlets, King Hamlet and Prince Hamlet. Important to keep that distinction in mind. King Hamlet is Prince Hamlet's father. In addition, we are going to have a King Fortinbras and a Prince Fortinbras. King Fortinbras is the former king of Norway, and his son, Prince Fortinbras, is the current prince of Norway. So these are the main characters that we're going to be introduced to in this act and scene. Now, as far as what unfolds in this particular act and scene, outside the castle Elsinore, this is where it's taking place, Francisco, a sentinel or a castle guard, stands watch. It's dark and it's cold. He is replaced by Barnardo at midnight. Marcellus, another guard, and Horatio, a young scholar and nobleman, show up while Francisco leaves. The three, Barnardo, Marcellus, and Horatio, discuss the strange events of the kingdom and the reason why Horatio has come to the soldiers to watch that night. The guards say they have seen a ghost that resembles the recently dead, late King Hamlet. Horatio doubts the ghost will appear, but it suddenly does appear, and all three men are like struck. They're amazed. Horatio tries to talk to it, but the ghost leaves, and Horatio considers this to be particularly bad news. Now, this is an important line, which again we'll get to this idea of foreshadowing that will foreshadow what's to come. The topic of conversation immediately shifts to the matters of state, politics. Marcellus wants to know why it looks like the country is preparing for war and building weapons like crazy. Horatio explains that the country is afraid of an attack by young Prince Fortinbras, whose father, King Fortinbras, was killed in battle by King Hamlet, whose ghost the three of them have just seen wearing the armor he had on, King Hamlet had on, when he killed King Fortinbras. In defeating him, King Hamlet's kingdom, Denmark, took possession of King Fortinbras's kingdom, possession of part of it. Now, Prince Fortinbras seems to be gathering supplies to take back the territory that was lost by his father to the late King Hamlet. The men wonder and kind of speculate about the connection between the ghost appearing and the coming war. They compare it to the assassination of Julius Caesar, when again the ghost appears. The men try to speak to it and they attack it. It disappears when the rooster crows. There's this crowing of a rooster, which signals the end of the night. The three men agree that they should bring young Prince Hamlet to see the ghost for himself. And it's here that the scene ends. So, with that, let's go ahead and do a close read and analysis of the play itself. Okay. Act 1, Scene 1. Enter Barnardo and Francisco, two sentinels or castle guards. Barnardo, who's there? Now, I'm a huge fan of opening lines. I think that the way that authors start their literary works is very interesting and very fascinating. I have a keen eye, I think, for how they set the tone of the play, so or the work, the literary work. So, who's there as a way to start a play? You have to imagine the play. It's dark, it's midnight, it's cold, it's outside of a dreary castle where a king has recently been murdered. And you've got a guard standing and addressing the audience, but also an empty stage. And so this question of who's there can refer to who else is there on the stage. It can refer to who's there in the audience. It can refer to who are you who's watching this play. And so this idea of who it is that's viewing this is central to understanding the thematic idea that's embedded throughout Hamlet, which is who are we? Who is it that makes, what is it that makes us up? And it's really important if you're writing a play and you're performing a play to know this and to think about this question, because what's a play without an audience? Is it a play if there is no audience? So when we think about this question, we have to think about it on many different levels. We have to think about it as, who are we that watches the world, that observes the world? And who are we that observes ourselves? Are we just a collection of molecules and atoms and cells that operate in a kind of objective sense in the world? Or are we a set of experiences, a set of memories? Are we both of these things? And what role does our consciousness or our awareness of our experience, our subjective experience, play in this objective versus historical or subjective uh, perception of the world? Now, all of this is contained in this single question, and so much more is here. But for us, it'd be important to note that this sets up a thematic idea. What is the identity of the audience, speaker, and the listener? Who are we really? Are we? Are we objects? Are we subjects? And what role does consciousness in our observations, experiences, the world? This thematic idea will come back repeatedly as we think about and reflect on how we consider Hamlet. Who is Hamlet really? Is he a noble prince who's working to avenge a wrong that's done against him? Or is he a madman who seeks vengeance because it satisfies a primal urge that he has? Or is he somewhere in between? So Barnardo asks this question to kick off the play. Who's there? Francisco responds, "Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. Reveal yourself to me. Stand and unfold yourself. Long live the king." So this is Barnardo's way of answering, who am I? I am one who is loyal. I am one who belongs to this kingdom. Long live the king. Barnardo? He. Yeah, it's me. Francisco responds, "You come most carefully upon your hour." So you've come at the right time. You've come exactly when you should be. "'Tis now struck 12. It's midnight. Get thee to bed, Francisco." Francisco, for this much thanks. For this relief, much thanks. 'Tis bitter cold. Got a setting here. Cold and night. Remember just recently on the previous line, it's now struck 12. It's midnight. And I am sick at heart. I feel terrible. Have you had a quiet guard? Not a mouse stirring. Well, good night. If you meet Horatio and Marcellus, the rivals of my watch, bid them make haste. In other words, the other guys who are going to be on duty with me, if you see them, tell them to hurry up. Oh, well, here they are. Enter Horatio and Marcellus. I think I hear them. Stand ho! Who is there? Friends to this guard, and liegemen to the Dane. So again, we've got this identification of loyalty and allegiance to the crown. Give you good night. Oh, farewell, honest soldier. Who hath relieved you? Francisco says, Barnardo hath my place. Give you good night. And so he exits. He leaves the stage. And so now we're left with Marcellus, we're left with Horatio, and we're left with Barnardo. Hola, Barnardo, says Marcellus. Say, what? Is Horatio there? A piece of him. So a piece of him means I'm pretty darn cold and it's pretty late. So I'm not all here. I'm pretty miserable and like part of me wants to stay inside the castle. So this is a nice characterization. The bitter cold in the late night. Hardly agree with Horatio. Welcome, Horatio. Welcome, good Marcellus. Horatio asks, What? Has this thing appeared again tonight? Barnardo responds, I have seen nothing. Marcellus. Horatio, 'tis but our fancy, says, Horatio says, 'tis but our fancy, and will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. Therefore I have entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that if again this apparition come, he may approve our eyes and speak to it. In other words, Marcellus says Horatio thinks that this, whatever is appearing to them, is but our fancy. It's not real. It's deep. It's an imagination, and will not let belief take hold of him. Which means he's not going to let this thing kind of like deceive him, or he's not going to be deceived by it. Touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. So we've seen it twice, but he's not going to see it. Therefore, I've told him, come along with us and we can watch. And if it does appear, he can basically confirm that we've seen it, and then he can speak to it. Horatio says, Tush, tush. It will not appear. It's not going to show up. Barnardo, sit down a while, and let us once again assail your ears that are so fortified against our story, what we have 2 nights seen. Well, sit we down, and let us hear Barnardo speak of this. Last night of all, when yon same star that's westward from the pole had made his course to illume that part of heaven where now it burns, Marcellus and myself, the bell beating one, suddenly we have the ghost appear. So this must be what it was that they have been seeing these last 2 nights. Let's take a step back and notice that we've also got a little bit about Horatio here that tells us a little bit about his character. Horatio, so we can notice that this is characterization. Horatio is skeptical. He seems much less superstitious than the 2 guards. Now, this might have to do with his education or his upbringing or his just general lack of belief that these guys have seen what they've seen. But it tells us a little bit about him. It tells us, first of all, that he's at least willing or at least curious enough to come out and see what these guys are talking about. But he's not willing to believe them right away. So it gives us an interesting background and interesting insight into his character. He seems pretty honest at this point. So the ghost comes for the last couple nights, and it's always appeared at 1. And now we've got the ghost. Marcellus, peace, break thee off. Stop talking. Look where it comes again. In the same figure, like the king that's dead. In other words, the ghost appears to the dead king. Marcellus says to Horatio, "Thou art a scholar. Speak to it, Horatio." Barnardo, looks he not like the king? Mark it, Horatio. Horatio says, "Most like. Harrows me with fear and wonder. It strikes me with just an absolute awe and wonder. I'm terrified." So again, we've got this characterization. Horatio, the skeptic, sees the ghost and it strikes him with awe, wonder, with amazement. So, yes, of course, he's skeptical, but at the same time, he's not going to doubt what his eyes have shown him. Again, this speaks to his honesty. He's willing to accept what it is these guys are showing him. Barnardo says, "It would be spoke to." Marcellus, "Speak to it, Horatio." Horatio, "What art thou that usurpest this time of night, together with that fair and warlike form in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march? By heaven, I charge thee, speak." Horatio is shouting to the ghost, and he's asking, "Why are you here? Why are you coming at this time of night? And why do you appear to look like that fair and warlike form, that handsome yet formidable form in which the majesty of buried Denmark would be the king. Sometimes we refer to the king by the country that they represent. We call this the royal we. So he represents all of Denmark, and he's been buried. So this is the buried king of Denmark. So why are you appearing in his form? And you should tell me why you're here." Marcellus says, "It is offended." Barnardo says, "See, it stalks away." Horatio, "Stay, speak, speak, I charge thee, speak." But the ghost leaves. Marcellus, "'Tis gone and will not answer." Barnardo says, "How now, Horatio, you tremble and look pale." Yeah, I wonder why. "Is not this something more than fantasy? What think you on it?" Horatio says, "For my God, I might not this believe without the sensible true avouch of my own eyes. I would not have believed this if I hadn't seen it for myself." "Is it not like the king?" says Marcellus. Horatio, "As thou art to thyself, it looks like the king as you look to yourself. Such was the very armor he had on when the ambitious Norway combated. So frowned he once, when in an angry parle he smote the sledded Polacks on the ice. 'Tis strange." In other words, what Horatio is saying here is the king had on the very armor that he wore when he fought. King Norway. Remember, we, we know that this is King Fortinbras, and defeated him. We can know a little bit about the character of the former King Hamlet. He was warlike. He was a warrior. Hit that again when it says, so frowned he once when in an angry parle he smote the sledded Polacks on the ice. When he fought the Polishmen who rode in sleds, when he fought them on the ice and defeated them, he smote them. It's strange. It is strange, he says. Marcellus. Thus, twice before, and jump at this dead hour, with martial stock hath he gone by our watch. So, twice before, this dreaded figure of the king has appeared, and he's walked back and forth along the ramparts and outside the castle, and he's stalked their watch. He's like stalking outside in the forested area. And this is important to consider because when we think about the supernatural, we think about this area that's outside of the castle walls. It's outside of the civilized warmth of the hearth and the home, but it's out inside the wilderness. It's this mysterious force that we don't understand. In other words, it's strange, as Horatio says. So this goes to speak to this deeper understanding and the deeper mystery of the supernatural, which, if you're thinking along the psychoanalytic lens, it kind of reveals how people consider the natural world. It's both this place of creation and majesty and beauty and wonder, but it's also this place of mystery and death and chaos and disorder. And so, what the ghost represents is this second part. Consider how the grisly appearance of the king in this armor that's like looks like it's been through a war, so it's probably bloodstained and smashed. How it represents this kind of chaotic, horror-filled disaster that awaits all of us given enough time, because nature is both this creative force that gives rise to all. And so it's this beautiful miracle that we all receive, but it's also this terrible, destructive force that awaits everyone as well. And that's what the ghost represents. Horatio goes on to say at around line 78, in what particular thought to work I know not, but in the gross and scope of my opinion, this bodes some strange eruption to our state. Foreshadowing. This is bad news. Consider that, if this horrible aspect of nature is appearing and stalking outside the walls of the castle, this is not a good sign. This is not a good omen or not a good foreshadow for what is to come. This bodes some strange eruption to our state. Speaking of strange eruptions to our state, we're going to have a shift in focus. The ghost has disappeared, and Horatio has left us with this ominous foreshadowing. Now Marcellus is going to say, hey, speaking of our state, let me ask you something. Sit down and tell me, he that knows, why this same strict and most observant watch so nightly toils the subject of our land, and why such daily cast of brazen cannon and foreign mart for implements of war, why such impress of shipwrights, whose sore task does not divide the Sunday from the week, what might be toward this sweaty haste, does make the night joint laborer with the day? Who is it that can inform me? Marcellus is asking, why is it that the country seems to be preparing all these implements of war, all these cannons and ships, working every single day, including Sunday, the holy day, for this audience and for these characters? They're working every day of the week. Why is it that the country is preparing for war? He's like, hey, who can answer this question for me? Horatio's like, I'm a scholar. I can let you know. He says, that can I. At least the whisper goes so. So I'm only dealing in rumors, but let me tell you what I know. Our last king, remember King Hamlet, whose image even now appeared to us, was, as you know, by Fortinbras of Norway, thereto pricked on by most emulate pride. So he was challenged by Norway, and it offended his pride. He's like, that, uh, let me choose my words carefully, that, to heck with it. That bastard over there in Norway is going to challenge me. To hell with him. Grab my sword and truncheon and let's get to battle. And he dared him to combat, in which our valiant Hamlet, so King Hamlet, for so this side of our known world esteemed him. So as we think of him, but as they think in Norway, he's not so valiant or noble, did slay the Fortinbras. So he killed King Fortinbras, who, by a sealed compact, well ratified by law and heraldry, did forfeit with his life all those his land which he stood seized of to the conqueror. In other words, King Hamlet seized. So this is establishing the exposition. King Hamlet seized the lands of King Fortinbras of Norway after a battle to the death. Hardcore. Against the which, I'm reading here at line like 102. Against the which a mighty competent was gauged by our king, which had returned to the inheritance of Fortinbras, had he been the vanquisher. In other words, if Fortinbras had won, he would have gotten the lands that belonged to King Hamlet, as by the same comart and carriage of the article design, his fell to Hamlet. Now, sir, young Fortinbras, so this is Prince Fortinbras, King Fortinbras's son, of unimproved metal, hot and full, hath in the skirts of Norway here and there sharked up a list of lawless resolutes for food and diet to some enterprise that hath a stomach in it. So now, this is further establishing exposition. Prince Fortinbras is gathering. Now, we should say also that Horatio makes note of Fortinbras's character. He says he's of unimproved metal, hot and full. So this is a nice play on words with regards to this idea of metal. Metal is one's inner spirit, but he says that this metal is hot and full. So metal, as in metal, like metal, or like that substance that we make like armor and swords out of, right? It's hot and full. It's strong, and it's made of like martial or military might. So Fortinbras, Prince Fortinbras, strong young man of military might, is gathering together a list of lawless resolutes. So this is a group of mercenaries for food and diet to some enterprise that has some stomach in it. Some stomach in it. Nice. So he's got together a group of mercenaries and they're planning something with a great hunger, let's say. Something that has a lot of potency to it. And so, what is that? Is no other, as it doth well appear to our state, but to recover of us by strong hand and terms of compulsatory those foresaid lands, so by his father lost. So it looks like what he's planning and doing is attacking and taking back his lands. Take back the lands lost by his King. This, I take it, is the main motive of our preparation. So this is why we're getting ready for war. It looks like what young Fortinbras is doing is getting ready to attack us. The source of this, our watch, so this is why you're out here, and the chief head of this post haste and rummage in the land, and why it seems like everyone is running all about trying to get ready and prepared. Barnardo says, I think it be no other, but even so. All right, so I agree with you. Well may it sort that this portentous figure comes armed through our watch, so like the king that was and is the question of these wars. So this might be some explanation for why our king is coming and wandering through our land. So this is a little bit of foreshadowing and establishing the exposition. There's a connection between coming war and the appearance of the ghost of King. And so Horatio, being the scholar, and it's interesting that they pair these two groups of people. You've got these kind of lower class, men of the world, these guards out here, right? And then you've got this kind of like ivory tower, hyper educated, sciency guy, and they're paired together and they're trying to figure out, what is going on, why the appearance of the ghost, and what is the connection between the ghost and the preparations for war. And so Bernardo, again, this kind of like man of the people, everyday guy, working class dude, says to Horatio, I think that they're probably related. There's a connection. And Horatio's like, maybe. He says, a mode it is to trouble the mind's eye. this is a beautiful image here, if you can imagine it. So if you've ever like squeezed your eyes really tightly shut or rubbed them when you've been particularly tired, and you open them and you see those little floating blobs that appear in your vision, that's a moat. And so if you can imagine that there's one of those in your mind's eye, it's like this floating distraction that you can't quite focus on even when you look at it in your mind. It's like it's always eluding you. It's always kind of out of your vision, but just there as like as an image, as an illusion. It's difficult to see even though it's right in front of you. A moat to trouble the mind's eye in the most high and palmy state of Rome. So here Horatio is going to start to tell a little story. A little ere the mighty Julius fell, the grave stood tenantless, and the sheeted dead did squeak and gibber in the Roman streets, as stars with trains of fire and dews of blood, disasters in the sun, and the moist star upon whose influence Neptune's empire stands, was sick almost to doomsday with eclipse, and even like precurse of feared events, as harbingers preceding still the fates, and prologue to the omen coming on, have heaven and earth together demonstrated unto our climature and countrymen. Okay, so Horatio tells the story of the murder, the assassination of Julius Caesar. Now, Shakespeare has also told this story in one of his great history tragedies, the of Julius Caesar. But what he's referring to here is actually one of the things that Shakespeare actually depicts in his version of Julius Caesar is that just before Julius Caesar is murdered, all of the graves start to erupt with their quote unquote tenants. So they're dead bodies that start to move around the streets of Rome, and they're squeaking and gibbering. They're like making like horrible noises throughout the Roman streets as they walk around, and stars with trains of fire and dews of blood. So you can imagine falling stars, and they look like streaking flames across the sky. So you got probably like a meteor shower happening at the time, but not to these people. It looks like the very sky is falling and it's crashing around them and bleeding, that there's disasters in the sun, that the sun is, it looks like it's exploding, and the moist star upon whose influence Neptune's empire stands was sick almost to doomsday with eclipse. Now, if we think about the moist star, what do you think that refers to? Which star or planet or moon might be the moist star to these people? The one that holds sway over Neptune's empire, or who influences Neptune's empire. Neptune is the god of the sea. That this star or planet or moon is sick almost to doomsday with eclipse. This is talking about the moon, and that it was undergoing a lunar eclipse at this time. So we've got these natural mysteries occurring to these people, and they're trying to understand what it might mean. We've got a lunar eclipse, we've got meteor showers, and we've got what appears to these people as the dead walking among the living. So all of these things are like natural wonders, and absolutely for them indications that something is not right in the world, that heaven itself is shifting and moving to signal that there's a massive event that is about to occur, that these bad omens are hinting at. Now, for us in the modern day, it's like, okay, so you have a lunar eclipse and you have a meteor shower, and maybe some people who appeared to be dead, recovered somehow. Right? But that's not how these people see it. And it's important that we kind of step out of our 21st century suppositions about what is true and try to put ourselves in the mindset of these characters as we encounter what they're saying, because for them what these things represent is the natural wonders of the world signaling that there's some epic event that's going to happen. And for them it was the murder of Julius Caesar. So if we're going to try to understand how these characters are thinking, we've got to understand why they think what they think. Now, these wonders of the world, meteor showers and eclipses, they're not understood in a scientific way for these audiences and for these people. These are acts of heaven. These are divine manifestations in the world. They're mysteries. And so what they do in order to try to understand them, as all humans try to do this, is they try to systematize it and they try to categorize it and they try to compartmentalize it. And the way that they do it is they project these personified um, deities onto the natural world in order to give them some kind of explanation. And so we've got Neptune as the god of the sea. We've got um, the eclipse as being an omen for the murder of Julius Caesar, along with the dead walking among the streets and these trails and these fires of blood. So all of this kind of plays into the psychological understanding of who these people are and how they're understanding the world in which they live. And so this story is really important for both understanding how Horatio sees the world, but also how these people see the world and understand the world. So that's all contained within that story. It's quite complicated, but it's important for us to understand how these people are viewing this ghost and how these people view these supernatural events. That heaven and earth, he says here, heaven and earth together demonstrated unto our climatures and countrymen. Heaven and earth work together to demonstrate important and key events that manifest themselves to human beings. This was the belief at the time, and it's important to understand this belief if we're going to understand this text. And so, as he says that heaven and earth together demonstrate unto our climatures and countrymen, the ghost appears again, but soft. Behold, he says, lo, where it comes again. I'll cross it though it blast me. Stay, illusion. He opens his arms and asks the illusion to stay and to speak with them. If thou hast any sound or use of voice, speak to me. If there be any good thing to be done that may to thee do ease and grace to me, speak to me. If thou art privy to the country's fate, which happily for knowing may avoid, oh speak, Or if thou hast abhorred in thy life extorted treasure in the womb of earth, for which they say you spirits often walk in death, speak of it, stay and speak. The cock crows at this point. It's important, and we'll come back to that. So Horatio is saying here, hey, please tell me why you're here. Give me some information so that I might better learn about these heaven and earth uh, omens that seem to be connected to your appearance. So if you know what's going to happen to our country, tell me. Or if you can tell me about your treasure, I would like to know. So he's, kind of like, Ghost, if you got a little bit of gold stashed away, please tell me, because I'd like to know. Maybe make myself a little bit richer. So the cock crows. So we've got the crowing of the rooster. Important detail. Signals more exposition. Why? Well, when is the rooster going to crow? It crows, rooster crows, daylight. We've got the passage of an entire night here in this scene. It was midnight, then one, the ghost appeared, the men kept talking, they talked all night, and now the rooster is crowing, signaling the dawn. So it's been about 4 or 5 hours. This has gone by. Think about all the ways that Shakespeare has signaled then that there's been a passage of time and that there's a specific setting and there's a specific set of circumstances that are constructing and constraining and guiding how these characters are going to be moving throughout the remainder of the play. So stop it, Marcellus. Marcellus seems to be jabbing at it with his pole arm, with his long partisan. Shall I strike it with my partisan, my long spear? Do, if it will stand. 'Tis here. So it's appeared one area. 'Tis here. It appears somewhere else, and then it's gone. We do it wrong, being so majestical, to offer it the show of violence, for it is as the air, invulnerable, and our vain blows malicious mockery. We cannot hurt it with, or can't interact with it physically. So we offer it wrong by trying to do so. It was about to speak when the cock crew, Barnardo says, and then it started like a guilty thing upon a fearful summons. So Horatio starts to speak again and gives us some indication about why he thinks that it disappeared when the rooster crowed. I have heard the cock, that is the trumpet of the morn, doth with his lofty and shrill sounding throat awake the god of day, and at his warning, whether in sea or fire, in earth or air, the extravagant and erring spirit hies to his confines of the truth herein this present object made probation. So again, this is telling us a bit about how these characters are thinking psychologically. The rooster signals the dawn and heralds the god of day, which banishes spirits. So a nice superstition, but you might think about this like metaphorically, that when the sun comes up, the mysteries of the night tend to evaporate, that the creatures of the night or the animals who inhabit the night go back to sleep or go away or recede when the day comes. And so Marcellus follows up and he says, it faded on the crowing of the cock. And so he then offers his interpretation. Some say that ever against the season comes, wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated. This bird of dawning singeth all night long, and then they say, no spirit dare stir abroad. The nights are wholesome. Then no planet strike, no fairy takes, nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and so gracious is that time. So this is interesting, and it's a very interesting signal of the times in which Shakespeare's writing. We've got this interesting blend of Christianity, which we can see with this notion of the Savior, and local or regional superstition, which we can see in this idea of spirits, fairies, witches, and so on. At this time, you've got local beliefs interacting with the larger biblical belief of surrounding the life and death of Jesus Christ, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so, what Marcellus is revealing here is this blend that what the cock or what the rooster represents when it sings, when they're celebrating the birth of Christ, that when it crows, it's going to banish all spirits all night long, and that there's never going to be a spirit that walks around. And so, nowhere is this recorded in the Bible, but it signals the way that people incorporate beliefs, larger beliefs, or beliefs about systematic religions with more regional beliefs that exist through story, through fairy tale, through fable, through just a set of understandings of the natural world. And so, what this kind of represents, or what this kind of reveals to us, is the way that people will take a larger framework like Christianity, or I'm probably not choosing the right words when I say larger framework, but when a more systematic view of of religious thought, and they incorporate it with an existing framework for understanding the world, like fairy tales and superstitions. And this was very much the case at Shakespeare's time. Horatio follows up and says, so have I heard, and do in part believe it. But look, the morn in rusted mantle clads, the morning is coming. It's walking over the dew of yon high eastward hill. It's coming up in the east. Break we our watch, or break we our watch up, and by my advice, let us impart what we have seen tonight unto young Hamlet, for upon my life, this spirit, dumb to us, will speak to him. So, again, we're going to establish our exposition. What are they going to do? They're saying, let's go tell young Prince Hamlet that we have seen the ghost of his father, because maybe the ghost will speak to him if it doesn't speak to us. Again, not only does this reveal a bit of the exposition, it lets us know what's going to happen later on, but it also signals how they think. It's a reasonable thought. If you're seeing a ghost and the ghost seems to want to speak, maybe go get someone who's related to that ghost to interact with them. Do you consent we shall acquaint him with it as needful in our loves, fitting our duty? Marcellus says, let's do it, I pray. And I this morning know what we shall find him, where we shall find him most convenient. I know where we can find him. Let's go tell him. Okay, so we know where we're going next. We're going to go see Hamlet, and we're going to go tell him that we've seen what we've seen, so that he might be able to interact with the ghost. So we've got direction now in the play. When we pick up again, we'll be looking at Act 1, Scene 2, where we will see Hamlet and we'll tell him what we've seen. Until then, have a great day.